Good evening, welcome to this primetime special. There are few events in the last 50 years that have had greater impact on Irish politics than the arms crisis of 1970. And tonight we revisit those history-changing days with a remarkable report that challenges long-established opinions about who did what and who knew what. Evidence of the Colonel reveals how vital evidence that could have transformed the arms trial was mysteriously withheld. Michael Heaney's report asks who knew of the startling document at the heart of the case, who actually saw it, and who might be able to explain why it never reached the book of evidence. The story begins with a man who spent half his lifetime arguing for a fundamental reassessment of the arms crisis.
31 years of railing against the wind and the tide take their toll. It's been a long haul for this former Irish Army captain and his wife, since the traumatic days back in 1970 when Jim Kelly believes he was betrayed by his own minister. He became the principal human casualty of the famous arms crisis.
He was found not guilty, but we never really tasted the success of that. We were always smeared with a little doubt, was he guilty or was he innocent? Was he guilty but got off, some people would maintain.
And Colonel Michael Heffern, another army officer with a distinguished record in 1969, but ended his career with a cloud hanging over him that even today his family struggle to understand.
This is the bizarre situation where he was a witness for the state. He was never arrested, he was never charged, he was never brought before the court and said, you have done something. And yet the whole thing has turned upside down and say, hold on a minute, he was a witness in the trial. He gave the evidence as he saw it, but somehow at the end of it, he's the guy that's been somehow vilified.
Those who are responsible for the debacle have no alternative now but to take the honourable course which is open to them.
You want Douglas to resign? I couldn't care less what he does.
There was one victor and quite a few other casualties in the arms crisis of 1970. Tonight, we report on a possibly sensational new development that may cause the record of those times to be rewritten. It's a story of an army captain and his colonel, a document discovered, hijinks within the state's apparatus, mysterious deletions on a witness statement.
Well, I felt this is the answer to my prayers in a way, because for 31 years I'd been maligned by a lot of people in this state and by historians everywhere, more or less, that I was guilty.
For the first time in 30 years, this document brings into sharp focus those missing pieces of the jigsaw puzzle that was the arms trial of 1970.
You would be prepared to say that this trial, the arms trial, one of the pivotal events of recent modern Irish history, would have been a totally different affair had this document reached the prosecution lawyers?
I think that to be the case, yes. It's an astounding document.
Was my father betrayed? Yes.
April the 18th, 1970, and Irish Army Captain Jim Kelly is off in Vienna, preparing to ship a top-secret consignment of arms to Dublin to be given to Northern Defence Committees. At Dublin Airport, an anxious John Kelly raises eyebrows when he inquires about the arrival of the shipment. At 6:30 exactly that evening, the phone rings at the home of Peter Berry, the powerful head of the Department of Justice. On the line, the Minister for Finance.
You know about the cargo that is coming into Dublin Airport on Monday? Yes, Minister. Can it be let through on a guarantee that it will go direct to the north? No. I think that is a bad decision. Does the man from Mayo know? Yes. What will happen to it when it arrives? It will be grabbed. I better have it called off.
The conversation between Charles Haughey and Peter Berry was one of the climactic moments in a drama that would become one of the great political turning points in recent Irish history. In the High Court, the Irish government, led by Jack Lynch, somehow extricated itself from the arms crisis. In the course of two traumatic criminal trials, Lynch's government effectively washed its hands of responsibility for the secret arms importation plan. What its ministers had initiated could not be stood over in the cold light of day. The convulsions were felt most of all within Fianna Fáil.
Well, there's no crisis that the government is continuing in.
We have been silent since last May for the sake of this organisation. We've been silent for the sake of our country. But now, if they want to fight, they can have it. Our policy is Jack Lynch's policy, De Valera's policy, Sean Lamass's policy. And we will continue that policy in spite of any bully boys within or without the organisation.
The joint axis of the Taoiseach and his former Minister for Defence, Jim Gibbons, successfully held off over many years party opponents who believed that Charles Haughey and Neil Blaney had been made scapegoats to save the government's skin. At the eye of the storm, the damaged figure of Jim Gibbons.
We'll win! We'll win! The goal is there! There's the leader there! And if you don't like it, walk that door!
Oh, oft in my thoughts to their fancy take flight to the home of my...
Jack Lynch went on to become one of the most popular Irish politicians ever, a reputation built on these crisis-ridden days. For that reputation, it was important that Jim Gibbons told the truth as his Minister for Defence and had never authorised the arms importation plan. The popular view of Jack Lynch was stated by his one-time Minister for Justice, Des O'Malley, after Lynch died 2 years ago.
In the period 1969-70, Ireland needed a particular kind of man leading it, and happily it had it.
When Jim Gibbons died several years earlier, his former government colleague Bobby Malloy described him as a man of scrupulous honesty and shining integrity, a giant among his peers.
I think there's absolutely no doubt in anybody's mind that Jim Gibbons was right all along and should never have been doubted by anybody. But in those days, there were those who had other agendas and who sought to put a different spin on the truth. And I think the truth will always win out in the end.
Captain James Kelly, John Kelly, a Belgian businessman Albert Loix, and the Minister for Finance Charles Haughey were the four accused of illegal arms importation. But the pivotal figure actually was Captain Kelly. Kelly was a 40-year-old, Cavan-born, highly regarded Irish Army intelligence officer at the time, who clearly became involved in seeking to import arms for Northern Defence committees. But crucially, Jim Kelly swore, and has maintained to this day, that he was doing so under orders and with his minister's authorisation. So in court, the key witness was always going to be the man in the middle, between Jim Kelly and his minister, who swore he didn't know of and didn't authorise Kelly's activities. Colonel Michael Heffern, the Director of Military Intelligence, held the key.
Thank you. Thanks very much.
When Jim Kelly went to the National Archive in January last to inspect state papers released under the 30-year rule, at the back of his mind was something Colonel Heffern had said to him after the 1970 trials. Heffern had told him, but couldn't prove it, that his statement to Gardaí had been doctored before it reached the Book of Evidence. At the Committee of Public Accounts in 1971, Kelly's counsel, a young up-and-coming barrister called Peter Sutherland, asked what may have been a prophetic question about Heffern's statement.
If that statement was included in the Book of Evidence, wouldn't it in fact have meant that there was no case against Captain Kelly?
Well, as I said, Colonel Heffern gave evidence in court.
The committee refused to call Colonel Heffern at this point to give evidence about the possible doctoring of his full statement. That statement had gone into the arms trial Book of Evidence, or so everyone presumed. The idea that it was doctored wasn't taken seriously. This is the statement from Colonel Heffron that was included in the Book of Evidence at the 1970 arms trial. We've got it from the files released to the National Archive in January of this year. In it, Colonel Heffron appears to implicate Captain James Kelly and Ministers Haughey and Blaney in the arms importation which was going on in 1970. And you will look in vain in this document for anything which might incriminate the Minister for Defence, Jim Gibbons. The only problem is, this is not Colonel Heffron's statement. This is. It did not take Jim Kelly long to find what he was looking for. It was a document retained in a file marked Department of Justice, and it appeared to be an original statement taken from Colonel Heffron on May the 30th, 1970. Kelly set about comparing it with the statement entered in the Arms Trial Book of Evidence. They were very different.
Well, as I read it, the Book of Evidence statement that was used in court presents is that Gibbons is eliminated from it completely, and that any reporting that Colonel Heffron did to him, and which he catalogued in his statement to the Gardaí, is eliminated. Any reference to arms and ammunition, any reference to Mr. Gibbons authorising my trips to the continent, everything in any way that involves Mr. Gibbons is taken out. The statutory authority is removed.
We were just absolutely astounded to find these papers.
You were astounded?
Absolutely astounded. I thought they would have had these papers shredded by this, you know.
About 20% of the statement is removed from the Book of Evidence.
It is my opinion that Mr. Gibbons knew that Captain Kelly was involved in assisting the defence committees in the North to procure arms. I told Mr. Gibbons at this time about Captain Kelly's involvement with the defence committees in the North regarding the procuring of arms and ammunition for their defence.
At what time is this?
That is, I have to go back here. It's around February, because he talked about mid-February at some stage here. So it's in February 1970. It was that around the time, in January, February 1970, when I was asked by the defence committees to take some action, positive action, in helping them to get the arms in. And I went to Mr. Colonel Heffron and told him about this request. And Colonel Heffron was a bit worried about it. But anyhow, he referred it to the Minister, and the Minister gave the go-ahead and actually cleared me for going to the continent and stuff. And so on. So it was around that time it happened. Around this particular time, Captain Kelly told him that he might have to go to Germany again in connection with the arms and ammunition for the North, and that a lot of snags had developed in connection with them. That was at the time that I went to see Mr. Gibbons on the 4th of March, which came up in the court. And actually, Mr. Gibbons himself admitted that I did go to see him on at least 2 occasions, reported to him directly, and kept him briefed on what was going on. That came out in the court. About this time, I saw Mr. Gibbons again in his office, and I told him that Captain Kelly, and this bit is taken out, and I told him that Captain Kelly intended travelling to the continent again in connection with this arms deal. That's taken out. And that's fairly straightforward. That what Colonel Heffron, who was my superior, who was the Director of Intelligence, authorised to deal directly with the Minister on matters of national security, stated that he told Gibbons this. That was deleted in the statement of evidence that was to be presented to the court.
Mr. Gibbons was prepared to take the necessary steps to have him relieved of duty in order that he could travel to the continent.
In other words, I was on what is called regimental duty in the army. You're detailed for this every so often. So in interest of secrecy, I was told not to. I couldn't go to anyone and tell them that I'd be asked why I wanted to get off. You have to give some reasons why you want to get off. And all this paragraph is eliminated. I went to Mr. Gibbons, is what Colonel Heffernan said, and I told Mr. Gibbons that in the event of he not performing this duty, that was me, I would have difficulty, that's Heffernan, in explaining his absence. And if he was not relieved of this duty, he would be subject to the normal army disciplinary action, unless some authority was given to relieve him of the duty. And Mr. Gibbons was prepared to take the necessary steps to have him relieved of duty in order that he could travel to the continent.
For arms and ammunition?
Yeah. So everything that related to the reporting by Colonel Heffernan to Mr. Gibbons of what went on and about the arms and ammunition and the state of play generally was eliminated. I don't know how the courts operate, and I'm not a legal person by any manner of means, but if evidence is given by a prime witness, a major witness, to the Gardaí, and the Gardaí take that statement, I do not see why the Gardaí statement should be changed in such a way as to change the whole meaning of it.
We showed Colonel Heffern's original statement of evidence to his son and widow. They'd never seen it before.
What do you think it is?
It's my father's statement given to the guards here in this house, and it was taken away from here, and this is the statement that was that the intention was, in his mind, would be put into the book of evidence. But what I see here isn't that. In my father's document, there are 19 mentions of Mr. Gibbons' name. 19, okay? And significant detail, material detail about the amount of reportage my father had with Mr. Gibbons, the connections between Mr. Gibbons and Captain Kelly, and the whole importation of arms, which showed that this was a legal as opposed to an illegal operation, because the Minister for Defence is the only person in the country that has the legal right to import arms.
What is your view of the changes that have been made to your husband's statement of evidence?
They're very deliberate. Very deliberate to change anybody's statement. I mean, you'd get that maybe from countries where there was no civil rights. That type of thing, that they could handle or do what they like with this.
With anyone.
John Kelly also had never seen the full statement from Colonel Heffern until we showed it to him last week.
The statement is different, so different, as chalk from cheese, from the statement we got in the book of evidence. This clearly indicates that the Minister for Defence, Jim Gibbons, was aware over that period of Jim Kelly's involvement with the Northern Defence Committees in the procurement of arms for the defence of Northern nationalists. Had that been the statement we got in the book of evidence, then, as I said, Michael, there would not have been a trial.
What happened, of course, was that there was a trial and all four were acquitted, John Kelly included. The jury were obviously not convinced that the attempt to import arms had been illegal. It was obvious at the time that Colonel Heffern's evidence had surprised the prosecution and thrown it into some disarray. In fact, the evidence of Minister Gibbons was almost single-handedly demolished by a fellow prosecution witness. And when a retrial became necessary, Captain Kelly and the other accused benefited again from evidence from Colonel Heffern that was totally consistent with his original but then filleted statement of evidence. The leading counsel for the prosecution in 1970 was Seamus McKenna SC. We sent the documentation to him, and among the questions we asked him was whether he'd ever seen Colonel Heffern's full statement before or during the trial. Mr. McKenna was authorised by the Bar Council to tell us, "I am as certain as one can be at a remove of 30 years that I did not see it." And he added concerning two deceased colleagues on the case, Eamon Walsh and Aidan Brown, "Nothing my colleagues said or did regarding the trial ever suggested that they had seen Colonel Heffern's longer statement." Primetime retained senior counsel Patrick McEntee to get a considered opinion on the implications of Mr. McKenna's statement.
Well, Mr. McKenna is a very experienced and honourable member of the bar, And he is telling you now, 31 years later, that at one of the most important trials that have happened in this country, one of the essential documents in the prosecution armoury was not available to him as leading counsel for the Attorney General.
Could there have been any possible excuse or legitimate reason for that statement not reaching the counsel for the prosecution in the court?
Well, none that I can think of.
How serious is this, in your view, as a very experienced practicing criminal lawyer?
Well, it seems to me to be very serious. 2 trials, 2, I think, what you could describe fairly as state trials. One before the President of the High Court, as he then was, Mr. Justice O'Keefe, and the other before Mr. Justice Henchy, were conducted on the basis of a flawed armoury. One of the really essential documents in the case was missing.
Is this a sinister development? Would you describe it as such?
I don't like the word sinister. It certainly shouldn't have happened.
And how would you describe this then? Is this a conspiracy to pervert the course of justice? What language would you use?
I don't know. I think the matter needs to be investigated. It needs to be looked into with great care, and the entire situation as it then was, both before and during and after the trial, needs to be looked at.
And who is the appropriate person to investigate this matter, in your view?
Very difficult to say. On the face of it, it should be done by the Garda Síochána. If the Dáil Parliament thinks otherwise, perhaps it should be done by a select committee of the Dáil.
The Attorney General in 1970 was Mr. Colm Condon SC. In reply to our inquiries, Mr. Condon has stated that he never received the longer version of Colonel Heffron's statement. He said, "My office received only the statement included in the Book of Evidence." Mr. Condon told us that he regarded the long statement as a mystery and totally unexpected. It did not come to my office, he said. And the former Attorney General added, "Had I got it, I would have gone to Mr. Gibbons about it." In assessing the actual relationship between the Minister, his Director of Military Intelligence and his Army captain on the ground, a key development occurred on February the 6th, 1970. Colonel Heffron made this note of how Mr. Gibbons handed his Chief of Staff and himself a startling new government directive.
I arose to leave, but the Minister waved me down with the words, "What I have to tell the Chief affects you too, Colonel. Stay." Then turning to General McKeown, he said, "General, I have a directive from the government for you. You will prepare the army for incursions into Northern Ireland. Should the situation, in the opinion of the government, warrant it, you will arrange to make surplus arms available." That is the directive. And from that moment on, my father's role changed significantly and materially.
What effect did this have?
Because no longer was he just supplying information about what was going on in the north, and particularly the nationalist population and the security situation. He was now being told to make surplus arms available for incursions into Northern Ireland.
The evidence that Jim Gibbons, as Minister for Defence in the Lynch government, was aware of Captain Kelly's arms buying and other activities is extensive and compelling. Firstly, there's the fact that the Minister for Defence established a military training camp for northern civilians in Donegal in September, only abandoned when the press got word of it. Secondly, both he and the Taoiseach Jack Lynch were informed from several unimpeachable sources about the seminal Baileyborough meeting in October '69, when Jim Kelly met representatives of defence committees and began the search for arms. Thirdly, as we've seen, there was Mr. Gibbons' famous February the 6th directive to the Army.
And the directive was quite a straightforward one. It was issued on the 6th of February 1970 by James Gibbons, who was the statutory authority for the importation of arms for the defence forces, issued on behalf of the government. That's the phraseology he used. and it was to prepare for incursions into Northern Ireland, to set surplus arms and ammunition aside for this purpose, and we have gas masks, was the third paragraph.
There was some attempt to argue that it was not a government decision to plan incursions and to prepare supplies of surplus weapons for distribution to Northerners. But that is effectively blown out of the water by another document in the National Archive released last January under the 30-year rule. Here we see an official minute of a meeting between Taoiseach Jack Lynch and his Chief of Staff, in which Lynch confirms his knowledge of and involvement in the famous February the 6th directive by his minister, James Gibbons.
The Taoiseach confirmed that the circumstances envisaged by the government were those assumed by the Chief of Staff. That means that Lynch knew about it. In May 1970, Mr. Lynch told Dáil Éireann that Mr. Gibbons, who issued this directive, had no involvement in the arms issue.
Fourthly, in early April 1970, Mr. Gibbons ordered the sending of 500 rifles to Dundalk after rioting in Ballymurphy and Belfast. They were clearly intended for distribution across the border. And fifthly, Mr. Gibbons was named as one of those involved in the arms plot in the crucial note which Liam Cosgrave got from an anonymous Garda in May 1970. But Mr. Cosgrave, it became clear later, left Mr. Gibbons' name out of his Dáil speech after discussing it beforehand with the Taoiseach, Mr. Lynch.
He briefed Mr. Cosgrave the night before. Mr. Cosgrave made a major denunciation of myself and others in Dáil Éireann, accusing us of treason and all sorts of stuff. He told Mr. Cosgrave that Mr. Gibbons wasn't involved, despite Mr. Cosgrave having a note from the Gardaí which showed the involvement of Mr. Gibbons. And Mr. Cosgrave did not ring up Mr. Gibbons' name, even though it was in that note. This is all established fact.
We now turn to the important question of who removed key sections from the statement of Colonel Heffern that was included in the Arms Trial Book of Evidence. In its margins, you can see annotations or notes. These appear to be drawing attention to sections that implicated the Minister, Mr. Gibbons, in the arms project. Sections which we know subsequently were left out of the Book of Evidence. Also in the margins, there is some handwriting. But whose?
I looked at it again, and then it dawned on me that it was marked by the official stamp of the Department of Justice.
The stamp bears an official's initials alongside the date. We have established, beyond any doubt, that the handwriting and notations in the margins come from the hand of the late Peter Berry, Secretary of the Department of Justice.
If the Department of Justice had any role in this, serious questions are asked. Serious questions. Because this just doesn't affect our family and our feelings, and I know what my father was, but it affects the people who are watching this program, because if they can do it to him, it can be done to anyone, and this is the rule of law.
But the department's stamp contains further information also. The day after Mr. Berry saw the document, it's marked "Seen by the Minister, 1st of the 6th. The Minister was Des O'Malley. According to this notation, Mr. O'Malley saw Colonel Heffern's full statement on that date.
Then I just have one question for the Minister for Justice at that time, is did he have a role in the deletions which occurred in my father's statement, the material deletions which referred to the fact that he had authority from the Minister for Defence? That's just one simple question. I'd really like him to answer it.
Mr. O'Malley has a question to answer about it. Does he remember this document? Does he remember what is in it? Has he any knowledge of the change that took place to the statement of evidence at the particular time? I think he should answer that question and answer it openly.
Mr. O'Malley is in poor health at present. We sent him the documentation and asked for his reaction. Through a spokesman, he declined to comment other than to say, "I have no memory of ever seeing this statement of Colonel Heffernan."
So you say there's no evidence against Mr. O'Malley.
No.
But the evidence is that he saw this document.
But to see is not a crime.
No, I know it's not a crime, but then he knew afterwards. He must have known if there was such an interest in the Department of Justice.
Not necessarily. He wasn't at the court. He wasn't necessarily familiar with the Book of Evidence. There's no evidence on the basis of this, Captain Kelly, that Desmond O'Malley necessarily knew that the statement of evidence had been altered.
I am not going to argue with you on that. And okay, there is no definite evidence to show that the statement that Mr. O'Malley knew the statement was offered. All I am saying is that his secretary, Peter Berry, on this official Department of Justice marking, notes that it was seen by the Minister on the 1st of the 6th, the day after Peter Berry obviously did these notations.
From the Committee of Public Accounts hearings in 1971, we know of at least one very senior Garda officer who admits to seeing the original statement of evidence from Colonel Heffernan.
Did you conduct personally, or did officers on your behalf conduct an interrogation of Colonel Heffernan during April or May 1970?
As far as I remember, some of the members of the detective branch took a statement from Colonel Heffernan at that time.
With regard to this statement, did you examine it?
I'm sure I read it at the time.
The full statement, which Captain Kelly unearthed in the National Archive, bears the names of then Detective Inspectors Ned O'Dea and Pat Ducey, the officers who appear to have taken it from Colonel Heffernan at the time.
We don't know who altered this document. What we do know is that it reached the Minister's office.
Mr. O'Malley says he has no recollection of seeing it, but it is marked as having been seen by him.
But that's all we know about Mr. O'Malley's involvement. We also know that his permanent secretary, Peter Berry, saw it the previous day and marked passages in it corresponding roughly to those subsequently deleted. But that doesn't mean that Mr. Berry made the alterations either. It just means that he saw it and he marked passages for his or for someone's subsequent attention. The question might well be asked whether any civil servant, even the legendary Peter Berry, would make alterations such as this off his own bat. We also know that 3 senior Gardaí, former Assistant Commissioner John Fleming and senior detectives Pat Ducey and Ned O'Dea, also had direct knowledge of this document. Now, that doesn't mean that they altered it. It just means that they may be able to assist with inquiries. All of them are still alive. Now, we're not saying that any of these altered this statement. What we are saying is that they may be able to assist in unravelling a genuine whodunit.
We asked the eminent criminal lawyer we consulted for this programme how the full statement of Colonel Heffernan might have altered the arms trial had it been available to the prosecution in advance.
It's very difficult to be categorical about this, but it would have put a totally different complexion on the appropriateness of charging Captain Kelly, and similarly on the appropriateness of not charging Mr. Gibbons.
Are you saying it's likely, on the basis of this statement, that Mr. Gibbons would have been charged with conspiracy to import arms?
I think that is a likelihood, yes. Can't be definite about it, but yes, I think it's likely.
And Captain Kelly would not have been charged?
I think he probably wouldn't have been. If he had been, I think just as the district justice at the preliminary examination refused information against Mr. Blaney, I think there's a probability, certainly a possibility, that informations would have been refused in respect of Captain Kelly.
And that presumably would also have applied then to Mr. Loix and to John Kelly, whose involvement was simply with Captain Kelly on this project.
That would seem to be so, yes.
Now we're left with Mr. Haughey. Can you offer any thoughts as to whether he might have been charged had this statement been admitted? Or any evidence?
I wouldn't be prepared to express any views on that at all.
But it
the
is
case
fair,
against Mr. Haughey was somewhat different.
But you would be prepared to say that this trial, the arms trial, one of the pivotal events of recent modern Irish history, would have been a totally different affair had this document reached the prosecution lawyers.
I think that to be the case, yes.
And is it possible that there would have been no prosecution at all, in fact?
Yes, that is a possibility. Yes. I can't put it further than saying it's a possibility that there would have been no trial at all.
Mr. Gibbons, clearly, I think, to any reasonable observer, was a key prosecution witness.
He was.
If he is charged, you'd wonder what kind of case might be left to the state.
That's right, and that's a matter that needs to be looked at.
Colonel Heffern died some 16 years ago, but even today his family are still smarting over how they feel the state abused a distinguished officer in the last months of his army career.
The wonderful thing about this wonderful man is that he survived it all, and without notes, without background, without files from his office, because he had been forbidden to go back into his office after he retired. He was a state witness, and he said, well, look, if you want me to record things or to recall things accurately, I'm going to need my files. And he was expressly forbidden to go back. So with only his own mind, this man who had just retired was able to take on the whole state machinery, the whole of the machinations, and it was Machiavellian. The end justified the means in this case, and the rule of law was clearly broken because this statement was changed. The rule of law was broken, and that's very, very serious.
While John Kelly, as an old IRA man, does not feel that he himself was damaged by the arms trial, he knows things have been otherwise over the past 31 years for his namesake from the Irish Army.
It's very definitely Jim Kelly was damaged by it. Not because he did anything wrong, but because there was a conspiracy against him to insinuate that he had done something, that he had dishonoured his oath of allegiance as an army officer, number one.
There was a stain left.
There was a stain certainly left, and this is why this document is so important from Jim Kelly's point of view.
And what about Mr. Haughey's career?
I think it stained Charlie Haughey's career as well, in terms of the impact it had on him. Blaney's career virtually ended, even though he never stood trial. Well, certainly the great significance of it, the great impact, the great injustice, was the injustice done to Captain Jim Kelly. As I said, Jim Kelly became the Dreyfus of Irish political and military life.
Well, it's a good few years since we came out here first, I'll tell you. 30 years ago.
If there's one man in the country who deserves recognition for sheer perseverance and grim determination to clear his name, it's surely this man. Tonight's revelations about dubious goings-on in the run-up to the arms trial of 1970 give Jim Kelly the first genuine hope that his name and his reputation can be properly restored after 31 years. But it's been a long road.
Of course I've been damaged. My whole family have been damaged. And I was accused by all these people of the most heinous crimes, of letting down the army, doing all sorts. That went on regularly. And then I had to go down to Ballybor eventually, to my hometown, because I couldn't get a job here in Dublin. And actually I was on the dole for 6 months in 1976, because I hadn't a halfpenny to support my family, and I looked for jobs from the road sweeper up. I wouldn't get them, because anything, even the business people, or that I was wrong, that it'd be bad news for the government and so on.
He was extremely angry, but you could see a reason for that. And people got tired listening to him, just didn't want to hear. And then as the years went by, I suppose we sort of mellowed too. We didn't push it too hard because the kids were growing up and, you know, with other interests. We didn't live it every day. Many, many years ago, when this thing broke in 1970, I wrote to the Archbishop of Dublin because I was so appalled that the government would do something like this. And he wrote back to me and said, the truth will prevail. And down through the years, I often thought of it, the truth will prevail, but the truth didn't prevail. And now I think we just might be on the verge of it.
That riveting report from Michael Heaney, and food for thought in more than a few quarters. That's all for tonight from Primetime. We'll be with you again Thursday week. Till then, from the whole Primetime team, a very good night and happy Easter.